The following video is one in a series on spiritual resilience training, a non-religious view of personal values and their dynamics with others. The contents reflect a variety of principles and practices of systems theory in relational counseling for team building and family resilience. Although the series is intended to support Army Corps values, each video also encourages the viewer to reflect on their current prominent values in specific situations and to consider what values may be more appropriate to means and results that are honorable and helpful with others. Chaplain Dillard initiates creating and posting these videos. Their contents and YouTube's linked videos do not necessarily reflect specific beliefs, practices, requirements, or endorsements of the Department of Defense, its subordinate organizations, or other groups with which Chaplain Dillard is affiliated.
Welcome back to our series on 5 love languages. This week we're talking about touch, which is my personal love language. I'm all about shaking hands with people in a good strong grip and giving a bear hug to my close friends and sitting beside my wife for a long, long time. Touch is high on her list, but not nearly as high as mine, and I need to realize that. Now, some of you who may or may not value touch as much, you may be interested to know that research on young children has shown a direct link between caring touch and whether they thrive or not. Especially, I think it was after World War II when some of Eastern Europe was liberated, they found whole orphanages of children that were barely touched at all. And they studied them over time, and they really failed to thrive physically, emotionally, socially, in any way. And it seemed to be directly related to the fact that they were not touched. They weren't held. They weren't cuddled and cooed like your average mother would do for a baby. So we are wired to be touched. It makes sense then that adults who lacked healthy touch when they were growing up may react on a broad spectrum of attachment. Attachment is not just being emotionally close to someone, although it is certainly that, but also physically and relationally close to someone. Just think about being unified or close, trust and loyalty and proximity for oneness in the relationship, which can be very important in family, work, and other types of relationships. So that broad spectrum could be somebody who's a loner. They've never experienced it, and so there's a feeling that maybe they're not worthy of being attached to someone else, or that no one is trustworthy because the way that they were touched was abusive, and so they've decided to be by themselves. Or somebody could be very clingy and very needy of touch, and it could be for some very similar reasons. One experienced the negativity, and so now they're staying away. Another experienced abuse or the absence of touch, and so they're wanting to cling to find the right person to be close to them. Either way, those are not healthy responses. They're natural and understandable responses, but only by seeking an appropriate touch and from a right person that can be trusted and commits over time can that begin to heal. So if you know that you highly value touch and others might not, you've got to slow down. I know that when I come in the door, first thing that I have to do is my dog is boiling me over. So I've got to pat him on the head and give him a little bit of scratching and get him out of the way so I can get to my wife and give her a hug. But I've got to notice before I get to her, I've got to watch her facial expression, her body language. If she's had a tough day, she's not immediately making eye contact with me because she's still off thinking about what happened during the day. If she's had a physically exhausting day, she might not get up at all. She might be sitting in the seat. And I should not go over there and pull her up to hug her because that's satisfying me. That's not taking care of her. So if touch is very important to us, but not as much as somebody else, we need to slow down. I just alluded to this. We are wired for physical intimacy, so we must be intentional in relationships. Just because I'm wired to want to be close doesn't mean that I should be close now or in the ways that I want to or with everyone equally. In one relationship, a handshake might be appropriate. In another relationship, a bow might be appropriate, or a high five, or a hug. But I have to be intentional for that relationship, not just for my preference. Secondly, if we want a level of touch that others do not want, we can strain the relationship. If I'm all about shaking hands and holding on, and maybe you shake someone's hand before and they just hold on the whole time they're talking to you. Some people want that. Some people, you can feel them start to let go, and they don't want that. If I push my preferences on somebody else, or they push them on me, it will strain the relationship, and it will not be better. It will be worse. Thirdly, those who have been physically abused may resist touch even in marriage. Just because a couple is married and they slip on the rings doesn't mean that things will magically get better overnight. I have talked to people and counseled people and experienced people who have slept in different rooms for decades who were married. And there's lots of history behind that, and it varies from marriage to marriage. But the fact that we are wired for physical touch doesn't mean it will naturally happen. And if there's been abuse, there can be a rewiring, which can be healed and brought about to a healthy relationship. But it takes time, it takes counseling, it takes some self-awareness of where that came from, and it takes work, and it takes both people wanting to move in that direction. And sometimes one is so deeply hurt or afraid or numb or has chaotic thinking about it, it can be very, very difficult. So we have to be patient with the other person. Even in a work situation, if you come up to somebody and you put their hand on their back and they have been abused, that can be enough to shake them for the rest of the day. So it can be helpful to announce your presence, to say hi to them as you're coming up from some distance so they're not shocked. Now, a person who's been abused many times will sit with their back to a corner so they can see. They're not taken by surprise. They're always aware and they're always on the defensive. But we can help them as well by being sensitive to the fact that they handle touch differently than we might. If you're not sure how much the other person values touch, read and respect their body language. For example, notice their usual physical proximity and their use of touch with you and others. The way people act, typically, not always, is the way that they prefer others act toward them. So if people create physical distance between them and others, there's a good chance that they're not comfortable with physical proximity. If they close the distance between them and others, there's a good chance that they enjoy closer physical proximity. Watch the way they shake hands. If they hold on a long time, do they touch shoulders? Do they hug close friends? All those indicators, especially on a broad spectrum of different situations, if you can discern patterns, that'll give you a good sense of the other person's comfort level with this particular love language. In non-romantic relationships, follow the lead of the person who is less touchy. That's also true of romantic relationships, but I want to especially make this applicable for you at work, with friends, etc., etc. So if you have a coworker or a neighbor or somebody on one of your sports teams, and you know that they're less touchy than you are, follow their lead. Emulate their level of touch, because they have the smaller comfort zone, and if you violate that, you violate the friendship, you violate trust and respect and rapport, and that's going to hurt the relationship long term. When in doubt, and with discretion, ask about their thoughts on touch in general. Now, this can be a touchy subject, so maybe you could just say that you've been watching the video series on the 5 love languages, and whichever one you perceive as difficult for them, for example, touch, make it further down the list, and you were watching videos on gifts and acts of service and time, and you'll get down to touch in a few minutes and ask them what are their thoughts, and then just listen. If they're comfortable talking about it, they're probably comfortable with touch. If they're not comfortable, they're probably not comfortable talking about it, they're probably not comfortable with touch, and that can be a good sign. Lastly, Seek balance by giving and receiving touch in your personal life. I've said this on all the previous videos. Something that is a love language, meaning it's about emotion and encouragement and trust and feeling accepted and loyalty. Those things need to be most prominent in our family, with our spouse, or if you're not married, with your fiance or whomever, with your kids appropriately. If we're hungry for those things are not happening in our family relationships or close friends, it can spill over into work and social relationships where it's not appropriate, and it can be counterproductive. Hope that's helpful. Tune in next week, and I think we're covering our last one, which is words of affirmation, and I hope to see you then.
At the release date of this video, I am stationed with Research Development and Engineering Command, RDECOM, at Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. Because the majority of our personnel are in this area, I spend most of my time here. I do, however, travel to our distant units based on command priorities and budget. I place these videos on YouTube for broad visibility to Army personnel and their families, but I hope the videos will be helpful to others too. If you are assigned to RDECOM and want to request specific topics by video, training on site or by VTC, or confidential counseling on site or by secure webcam, you can contact me at jeffrey.d.dillard.mil@mail.mil.